Alright, what's up everybody? So I'm not really sure what I'm going to be calling this video yet as of right now. I'm sure it's going to be something bold, but trust me, with a game like this, a bold title is absolutely what it deserves. For the past couple of days I've been playing through A Plague Tale Requiem, and the thing that I should probably start off with, right? The dominating thought in my mind as I was playing through the game is just thinking about the fact that I've been playing games now for over 20 years myself. I've been actively involved with it for the past 10 years, I would say, you know, being of course on YouTube, reading up on gaming news, seeing what goes on. And when you think about the day-to-day conversations that we tend to have about gaming, it's almost always negative, let's be honest. I mean, we talk about the bad business practices and we talk about the unnecessary remakes being offered at $70, the games as a service, the games being limited and what they can do because they're forced to come out across both generations and therefore can't fully utilize the power of a new console. All these kinds of things. You'd almost forget what the original reason was why you fell in love with gaming in the first place. What it was that, like, you know, the games that convince you, like, holy shit, this is why I absolutely love gaming, right? And suddenly a game like A Plague Tale Requiem comes along. And of course, I've been hugely anticipating it because I loved the original, but I had never expected myself, knowing how much I loved that first game, how much better the second one was going to be and how it was once again just going to remind me, this is what gaming always symbolized to me. This is why I fell in love with the medium. This is the kind of game that I want to recommend to my viewers, that I want to talk about, you know? And yeah, that's maybe another way that I could be describing it, is that A Plague Tale Requiem to me, it felt like playing Uncharted 2 back in 2009. It really is the sequel that takes the foundation of the first game, that saw how much potential it had and how great it already was, of course, but then built upon it in every single imaginable way with a more ambitious story, with you know, much higher production values, gameplay that's been expanded upon, set pieces that got added to it, virtually everything that you could possibly want from it. That is what A Plague Tale Requiem is, and that's why I can't wait to dive into my review here for the game and tell you why that I think you should definitely be, you know, checking it out. A real quick warning, I guess, that I should preface this video with is that I've myself very carefully selected which footage I'm going to be showing you from the game. So all of the footage that you're going to be seeing in this video right now is going to be from the first 6 chapters. There are going to be 17 chapters in total in the game. So again, this is basically the first third of the game essentially that I've been picking footage from. But even then, story-wise, of course, I'm refraining from showing you anything that can give too much away. It's mostly just that I want to show you all of the necessary mechanics in the gameplay, things like that. So keep that in mind. Of course, if you want to stay entirely spoiler-free, then it's probably best not to watch this video in the first place, or to simply look away and listen to my commentary. But for now, guys, let's get into the review for A Plague Tale Requiem. So, I still remember very well when A Plague Tale Innocence came out in 2019, and it sort of came completely out of nowhere, right? I mean, some people had been following all of the dev diaries, and I think they had been very open with the process of making that game, but it came from a very unknown developer, I guess, in Asobo, who before that really didn't have much of a track record at all. By now have started to really grow already, also having worked on, I think it is, a Microsoft Flight Simulator, which was very well received, of course. But yeah, it was a month, I think, after release when I played it, and I instantly fell in love with it. It was very easy to see why somebody like me would, because basically the way that you can describe A Plague Tale in general is that it sort of felt like this indie version of a Naughty Dog game, right? The finite, linear, story-driven adventure, very character-focused, and the two characters in general, you know, the two protagonists, Hugo and Amisha, they were just heartwarming characters, right? I mean, Hugo really had that childlike innocence. He was always so excited about what would go on in the environment. He'd call the aqueduct the Aqueduct and stuff, right? I mean, it's those kinds of scenes that like made you warm up to those characters so much. It also had a very authentic setting in France in the Middle Ages, the 1300s it actually is, during the an event which actually occurred in real life history, of course, the Black Death, the plague, basically, that involved all of these rats and stuff. But it gave it essentially its own supernatural type spin to it. Now, I'm really not gonna go too much into that first game because I feel like a lot of people are gonna see this and they're gonna want to play through it from the start, maybe not having played the first game in general, but of course, the way that the first game ends is essentially right where we get into then the story for A Plague Tale Requiem. It picks up right where we left off. Now, the dynamics have definitely shifted a little bit there, and that's the interesting part, where the first game I feel like was very focused on Hugo and Amisha, you know, and building that bond between the two. You know, at the time it was a little bit weird because, of course, at the very beginning of that game, Hugo essentially was locked up because there was something wrong with him, of course, right? And again, this is all the stuff that you learn in that game. But he and Amisha were essentially building that game still, although, of course, they naturally already had it being siblings. But they did that over the course of the game, and it very much became sort of the struggle for survival, meeting a lot of friends along the way. And yeah, it wasn't until the very last part of that game where you really started to get into, okay, what actually is going on with Hugo here, right? And that part then definitely forms the main core, I guess the core of the story now in the second game moving forward. You also got reunited, of course, with your mother, and I think that is very much sort of the interesting part, is that Hugo and Amisha now being reunited with their mother and also having Lucas, one of the characters from the previous game, still with them. Amisha and her mother, they kind of, how should I put this? They have these arguments over what they should be doing moving forward now. Amisha very much wants to listen to Hugo, and, you know, Hugo's been having this dream where he just kind of like wakes up on a weird beach, and he feels like, oh, he can just feel inside of him that like there's something up with that, and we need to try and go there and see where it is, this and that. But then their mom is still very much in that mindset at the beginning of the first game, where she's like, no, we need to listen to the experts, keep him essentially contained somewhere, because clearly all the stuff that's going on with the rats, he's causing it in some type of way, right? Amisha just doesn't really agree with that, but the game starts off relatively peacefully. I mean, the characters, they get themselves into trouble again right from the start, so don't get me wrong, there's plenty of stuff going wrong, but always good with the world for a little while. You know, one of the very early chapters, you essentially go to this completely new village, and it looks fantastic, you know, right in the middle of France, where everybody is, you know, people are dancing, and there's marketplaces, and Hugo is sort of like just enjoying the moment so much, right? Like, he's seeing so much stuff happen around him, you're interacting with it, very Last of Us type style, I guess you could say. And it's great, all is well. But things eventually obviously go wrong, and this is where I can't obviously go into it too much, because then I'd be simply giving away too much. Yeah, but like I said, the dynamic has shifted a little bit, and so the very early missions, for example, with Hugo, who is still having these issues and stuff, you'll now find that as Amisha, you're actually going on these errands to try and help Hugo, and you're doing so along with Lucas now for a change, and so it just takes a little bit to get going. I think the very early parts of the game in general, they are more exploratory, I guess. They are more just eye candy, and there's not really too heavy gameplay stuff going on yet, as you'd kind of expect. I mean, in all fairness, the first game had that very similar type of build-up. It's not really until you make your way through the first couple hours where you really start to get introduced to all of the gameplay mechanics, and that part just becomes a much more heavy aspect of the game in general. Overall, everything that you loved about that first game, about Innocence, it's still there. The core between the relationship, you know, between Hugo and Amisha, the way that they interact with each other, when they are eventually sort of like forced to go their own path, right? And to meet a bunch of different characters once again, because this game has plenty of side characters that will play surprisingly large roles. All of them also have separate character arcs that get rounded off in great ways, if you'd ask me. It's fantastic, and, you know, again, like, obviously I'm not gonna go into something like the ending, but the ending of this game, if I can describe it very vaguely, I mean, it is super memorable. It's actually, in some ways it is what I had expected, and in some ways it's absolutely not. I was surprised, and then at the same time thinking it through a little bit more, not too much necessarily, but people are going to be talking about this. People are going to be talking about the way that they decided to continue the story here, the way that they decided to, well, leave the game off, at least for now here with Requiem, right? That's something that people are definitely going to be touching on for a long time. So, okay, well, here we go. I mean, we have to talk about the presentation of this game, and I'm sure that I don't really need to do it because you've already been seeing all of the footage. Holy shit, dude. I mean, this game looks fucking gorgeous. It it is mind-blowing what they've done with the graphics for this game. Of course, like I already mentioned in the intro, this game only is releasing on next-gen consoles and PC. It's not going to be on the previous generation, and it shows the wide open environments, the scale. Again, with the game taking place in France, the castles that you see in the background, sometimes just like being forced to walk through these pools of blood with corpses around you, things like that. And of course, the rats, right? I mean, in the last game, it was already so impressive to just see them literally crawling up on the floors all around you. And then here, it's like, you'd almost think, I mean, they can't really outdo themselves in that particular way, right? No, but they found a way, dude. Basically, what they said is like, okay, we already managed to cover the entire region with them. Now we're gonna be we're just gonna be stacking rats on top of rats. It's like, it's no longer hundreds. It's like thousands of them, literally, that will be coming at you. You have these awesome Uncharted-esque, you know, chase sequences with the camera panned backwards or whatever, right? Where you're just running towards it, essentially, and just having them all trail you down. I mean, you can tell already, like I said, just look at the footage that I'm showing you. It looks absolutely ridiculous. There is a particular moment in this game that I'm thinking of, and it's only, unfortunately, it's like a 2-minute sequence. But I was watching that thing unfold. I mean, not just watching, I was playing actually, but I'm looking at it and I'm going, dude, this is more impressive than I've ever seen any moment in a Naughty Dog or Sony Santa Monica game be on a technical level. I don't even understand where Asobo suddenly got the you know, where they got the developers and the talent from to make this all possible, where they got the budget from to allow it to happen. I'm literally watching that particular scene and I'm going, they just put 10% of the overall budget just in these 2 minutes alone. It's absolutely ridiculous. This game looks gorgeous, and yeah, the soundtrack obviously cannot go unnoticed either. Still those great, you know, authentic songs that sell you not only the setting, but the emotions of the characters and what they're going through, right? Using the typical instruments like the violin and all kinds of other ones that fit the you know, the time period super well. Yeah, it's top of the line stuff, and I honestly just it came so out of nowhere. I never thought that a studio like Asobo could do this. Like I said, I mean, the first game looked great. Don't get me wrong. I thought it could definitely match itself with some of the best or better looking games, I guess, of the last generation. But then I'm playing this and it's like, this might very well be the most impressive game I've played. And I don't know if that's just because it's one of the few games that dares to only target those next-gen platforms like I talked about. But even then, I feel like, no, it really is just the talent of the developer and the investing that they've done into their own studio, the way that they've been able to upgrade, you know, simply by the success of the last game and all the other projects that they've been doing. Yeah, it's fantastic, and you're gonna love the way this game looks. It's gonna be just a treat to the eyes, you know, from the moment you start to when you end up beating the game. Now, gameplay is definitely, to me, one of the most interesting aspects by far to talk about. Also because in the last game, while I very much did enjoy playing it, and, you know, I thought the gameplay in general was satisfying, it also felt the most flawed, I guess, out of the entire package. Simply because, to me, I mean, a Plague Tale in general, it goes with this very untraditional approach to gameplay, where it actually takes away the usual, you know, gun combat or melee stuff that you would sort of expect, right? I mean, that typical satisfying, quick, fast-paced, reaction-based, I guess, gameplay. Instead, it goes for a formula that very much more relies on stealth, but also, I mean, I would rather almost describe this as a puzzle game in a weird way, where every single scenario that it puts you in, it's basically about you analyzing, okay, what tools do I have at my disposal? How can I use my environment here to make it through, you know, to the next part, essentially, right? I mean, you could use the rats and light sources that way to navigate them towards enemies, for example, or you could distract enemies by throwing rocks, you know, craft all kinds of stuff to throw at them, perhaps, this and that, right? That's what the layout always was, the setup for the game in general. But to me, the big flaw that the first game had was that all these arenas that they put you in, they were relatively small. And so every single time as well, I mean, I still remember it super vividly, you would literally enter this arena and there'd be a chest. And the chest would have a bunch of crafting materials ready for you to pick up there. You could essentially, simply by looking at the crafting materials that it gave you, you could tell like, oh, this is what it wants me to craft. This is what it wants me to do. And so every single combat arena only really seemed to have one solution to even make it through in the first place. That's why, to me, it was like, okay, this is not all too... it's not actually asking you to be creative or to try and, you know, for example, deal with the situation when unexpected things might come on your path or something like that, right? No, I mean, it's very laid out for you in the first place already, and it requires only for you to simply figure out what you need to do to make it through, like I said. Requiem doesn't really have that anymore. It still sort of suffers in a way from not allowing you, like I said, I mean, if you do get spotted, that's really where the flaws start showing. Like, this is a stealth game first and foremost, and you're not really even meant to be spotted in the first place, because when you do, although you do have a couple of abilities to make your way out, like you can simply hit the square button and stun enemies real quick to run away from them, but that's really, like, those are the few options that you have. I mean, you can run away and literally go into cover elsewhere, and then hope that the enemy doesn't spot you there, and that way simply get back to be put into the state where you usually want to be, which is, again, in stealth, where they don't actually know where you are, what your whereabouts are at that point in time. But other than that, I mean, again, like, this is not an action game. By all means, that's not what this is. That's not what you should expect from it. And even if they give you certain weapons, even in this game now, where, for example, the crossbow is new, it's still not expecting you at all to play it like an action game. Using the crossbow, like I said, which was introduced in this game, you can very easily just kill an enemy with one shot, right? But, for example, even there, ammo that you get is super limited. You get maybe 3 or 4 arrows usually, and using them on an enemy, that's it. You know, I mean, you'll find them very sparsely through the environments that you walk through, and so there's clearly a certain way that it wants you to play. And like I said, I mean, it takes away a little bit from the feeling of freedom that you might want to feel in a game like this, where, oh, no matter what I do, I can still solve the situation for myself. Like, it's still there, like I said, because you can simply run away, but it doesn't feel satisfying in that way. You still want to have that option of like, oh, you know, maybe I can still take out all my enemies guns blazing, right? But it's just not what this game will allow you to do. Now, that being said, the one thing that it did easily improve upon is that all the environments are so much wider. Very reminiscent to how Last of Us Part 2, for example, expanded on the combat sections compared to the original game. You know, there's just so many more paths that you can go through, and ways as well for you to actually make it through, if that makes sense. Like, no longer will you have that issue where you're picking up certain crafting materials and you can already tell, oh, this is what the game wants me to do. No, because you can go all kinds of ways, and I even feel like they've made it possible for you to get through almost every single situation by doing as little as possible. It would not surprise me if you can just make it through most of the fights, again, not killing any enemy in the first place, or perhaps not even sometimes using your crafting materials whatsoever. It will be difficult for sure, but I feel like it's definitely doable. The UI also has gotten a pretty significant overhaul, and it's much more clean now. Like, if you open the weapon wheel and it makes you go in slow motion, you only really have 4 options. 2 of them, to me, like, are still not even that useful in the first place, because Amisha, of course, still has a sling, which you can very easily get headshots with on enemies, of course. But also, you know, by selecting the sling, you will now, for example, see these 5 different options all of a sudden, and every single weapon actually has these options available to load it with a specific type of ammo. So, like incendiary, or there is tar, through which, for example, if you have a light source and you throw tar at it, it will simply expand it. So that way you can get either the rats to go away even further, or again, to get enemies stunned simply by standing in the vicinity of them. All kinds of stuff that you can do with it, right? Extinguishing material or whatever, right? That you will throw at a light source that an enemy is carrying, and that way suddenly it has no light source anymore and the rats will simply attack it, right? Those things that do, of course, still come directly from the first game still are here. Yeah, and that's, you know, some of the few ways in which you can try and make your way then through a scenario like that. Now, of course, the rats are still very much at play, and that's why you'll find that during most fights, rats will be present for you to essentially experiment with and to, you know, attack your enemies. But in this game, knowing what you know about Hugo now and the fact that he can actually control them, they allow you to use that in these fights. And so therefore, you can basically press the down button on your controller. At first, actually, for like a listen mode type of thing where you can see enemies through walls, but if you hold it, it will allow Hugo to actually control the rats in the vicinity, and you can just literally steer them, move them towards enemies. Now, the catch, of course, still being that enemies that will be carrying light sources and things like that, the rats simply won't be able to make it through that barrier. They won't be allowing you to get close to those enemies. And so it doesn't feel like a cheat therefore either. It's just like, oh, you enter a fight with a bunch of enemies there, and you can just weed it out a little bit by taking, you know, trying to search and find some that won't be carrying any light sources and then taking those out. But you'll still have to deal with a bunch of them on the field anyway, right? Because again, all of these things these tools that you have at your disposal will only be effective against certain kinds of enemies, and others will have to be taken out a whole different kinds of way. So by doing that, A Plague Tale still continues to make the fights feel fresh, and for you to not be able to, like I said, cheat your way around. There's maybe one thing that I should, and I'll be talking about the upgrade systems very soon, but like there's a particular upgrade that you can unlock, which, for example, allows you to then finally pick up ammo for your crossbow from enemies. You'll first have to literally upgrade an entire tree to get there, so it takes a while, but I feel like once you do get that upgrade, it definitely makes the game so much easier, because again, with crossbows you can take out most enemies with a single hit. And yeah, if you can then also pick up the ammo, which otherwise you can't do, and you get very limited ammo, like I said, suddenly you'll find that it becomes much easier, you know, to make your way through the combat parts. But yeah, last of all, upgrading is definitely something that we have to talk about, because I think they did something super interesting. There is actually 2 different upgrade screens in the game. Now, the first one is very straightforward, and it's what you would expect, having played plenty of other games, of course, where you'll just be picking up a bunch of resources from either, you know, enemies that you kill or whatever is present in the environment for you. And then these workbenches start popping up every 15 minutes or so, where it allows Amicia to use all that stuff to then upgrade a bunch of things, right? So, for example, you can reload faster your sling, right? Or your crossbow can handle more arrows. Very straightforward stuff like that, I would say. There's even a upgrade tree for upgrading in itself, where you no longer need the particular tools that you have to pick up every now and then, or you no longer need the workbenches. And it will just allow Amicia to upgrade stuff anywhere, at any point in the game when she wants to. So that's kind of, like, I saw that kind of as an investment and the thing that I wanted to put most of my stuff towards first. And then I started really upgrading my weapons and things like that. But like I said, there is also a second screen, and I think that is the very interesting part, is that A Plague Tale gives you upgrades based on your preferred playstyle. So there are 3 different trees. One is for aggression, one is for stealth, basically, I think it's called prudence, and then one is opportunism. And I haven't quite figured out exactly how they detect, you know, which tree you should be getting XP in, I guess, but like, I figured essentially, you know, that's the interesting part. Like, the game will simply, it can simply tell based on how you approach then the situations that, like, oh, if you leave a bunch of enemies alive, and so therefore you're playing super stealthy, you'll automatically get XP towards that tree. If you just kill people with the crossbow wherever you can, then aggression will automatically start getting that XP. Opportunism, that's the one that I'm a little, you know, misty about, I guess, where I'm not quite sure what it means, but I feel like sometimes, you know, you can make use of certain companion characters in certain ways, and I feel like that might definitely count towards it. Or at some point I got spotted and I just decided to make like a run for it, and I just ran as fast as I could towards the door that I needed to go to. Yeah, and I essentially speed ran my way through a fight, and I feel like that's doing that also gave me some more XP towards opportunism. But yeah, based on that, you actually get a bunch of upgrades. And so it's really cool because, of course, if you want to be fully maxed out, the game then forces you to play in all the playstyles imaginable. Now, when I beat the game, I will say, and I'm not sure if that's just because I play that mixed, I feel like I am definitely just a pretty aggressive player overall, but I had my aggression XP about over halfway through, and then the other two categories a little under. So it still was quite balanced at the end of the game, I would say, and it does require you to do a new game plus to then fully max out everything. And of course, also there's just a bunch of collectibles, which you'll know from the first game already, of course, but things that you'll want to go back for, you'll want to play through it another time, just to get the 100% completion. The trophy list is also very much just based on 100% completion. There's no difficulty stuff. It's just about like max out your character fully, find everything that you can find, and then you're essentially done. So the last thing that I should talk about here is the value, and it's once again where I was just so surprised, because for a game that looks this good, for a game that, oh my god, and the environment variety too, just like every single chapter feels like it has its own several arcs. Like, you will start off a certain chapter, and then by the time you finish it, you're like, holy shit, this was a whole journey in and of itself, you know what I mean? And that's what I wanted to talk about, is there are still 17 chapters, just like the first game, but they are literally twice as long. Every single chapter takes about an hour to an hour and a half to beat, and I play with a pretty rushed playstyle, I would say, so for most people it's probably going to be a little bit more than that, which ultimately added up together makes this game have a length of, yeah, about 20 hours for most people playing through it. And that is, it is not what I expected. I didn't think this game would be that long. Again, it just has been surprising me in basically every single area imaginable. I also saw, actually, can't believe that either, but it's going to be literally on Game Pass from day one. So anybody playing on Xbox or PC, I guess, who has Game Pass, you'll be able to just check it out, yeah, over there. Well, not for free, of course, because you're paying for Game Pass, but it's a pretty low price tag, obviously. And this is that finite, narrative-driven single-player experience, you know? I mean, you're going to be playing through it once or twice, but then you'll be done with it. So you can, I mean, if you really want to play it the cheapest way imaginable, just spend 10 or 15 bucks or whatever Game Pass is nowadays, and you'll be able to play through it in like a month time. So it's definitely to be recommended, I guess. Although I'd personally prefer to support a developer like this making a, you know, a game that is this good. But I also saw, yeah, that the full price, I guess, is actually going to be $60/euros as well. It's interesting because we have this conversation, of course, about the $70 price tag and how many games decide to go with it now. And a bunch of people are quite sort of outraged over it well, with particular games in general. But I saw here in Europe, actually, most of those games end up being 80 euros as well. This game goes for 60, so it's you know, it's a relatively large difference there. So yeah, man, like I said, there is a new game plus available, which just allows you to continue having all the upgrades that you already possessed, and so you can just continue to max them out. All the collectibles carry over, all of that stuff. I think you're actually being forced to play on the highest difficulty mode. You can't really play on easy or normal. Not that the difference is, honestly, they don't even make that much of a difference in the first place. But, and again, having some of those upgrades like the crossbow maxed out, you're gonna have a pretty easy time making it through. So I don't think that stuff matters too much. But yeah, man, that's essentially everything specifically that this game offers. Now, what else is there for me to say about A Plague Tale Requiem? I think that is definitely what I've already been noticing right now recording this review, is that I'm getting into all of these specific things, but I don't even really want to talk about these things. I want to talk about the story. I want to talk about the way it ended. I know people are gonna have these large discussions about it, and I'm excited for the potential future of this franchise as well, and yeah, the directions that they decided to go into. But all of that stuff, of course, it's impossible for me to dive into it now with a simple review like this before launch. Like I said, for me, A Plague Tale Requiem, more so even than Innocence did back in 2019, it represents what gaming to me should be. This is a finite, linear, single-player adventure that's just well-polished from start to finish, that has an amazing, ambitious story, great characters that you're gonna be, you know, warming up to. God, yeah, I mean, the presentation, honestly, it's still what stands out the most. It already kind of did in the first game, of course. It was that setting. It was France in the 1300s with all the rats surrounding, you know, the place. They really outdid themselves with this game. That is all that I can say. And I find it such a shame, too, because I literally looked it up, and it's like, they announced a year after A Plague Tale Innocence came out, I think, that the game had sold 1 million copies. And to them, of course, that's a huge success. And I understand that. They look at that as such a great achievement. But if we're really being honest about it, 1 million copies is not all that much. And it makes sense because, again, the game, it just didn't have the word of mouth as much. Or it didn't have, well, I guess it did have the word of mouth quite a bit, but it didn't have the natural popularity because it was an unknown developer and an unknown name. For the game as well, right? For the franchise. You would hope that with a sequel like this right now, not only are all the people who already played Innocence maybe got introduced to it because it already was put on Game Pass. I don't know if it ever came out on PlayStation Plus, for example, either. I would definitely expect that it might have already. Things like that will hopefully allow more people then to be introduced to the franchise and finally decide to give it a go at with the second game. I do absolutely recommend you play the first game if you can still. Not only is it fantastic in its own right, but it's also just a great setup and, you know, an ability for you to really understand these characters and what they went through to have this second game make even more impact on you, because it's not, you know, I get that they leave away the numbered sequel or whatever, right? But yeah, I do feel, again, you'll want to see what those characters actually went through to understand really where you're continuing here. But, God, man, this game, I mean, yeah, it was a blast from start to finish. I absolutely loved my time with it. I just kind of, I mean, the best sign of a game to me with how much I'm enjoying it is just the fact that I'm going to be rushing through it. That's honestly what I did. Like, it took me 2 to 3 days to beat it, even though it was 20 hours. It was just 2 to 3 days of me being an absolute addict. That's always been the great sign, you know, the great sign for me, even though I might have wanted to appreciate it a little bit more and stuff, right? But I knew that I was going to still do a second playthrough. I've already started that, and I'm, you know, in like chapter 4 already right now on New Game Plus. I'm trying to take my time a little bit more with it and stuff, but God, what an experience, guys. What a game. Maybe in the future I can still therefore make a more detailed video talking about the story and the franchise and things like that, but that is still to be seen. For now, I hope you all enjoyed my review for A Plague Tale Innocence. Of course, if you did, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you hadn't already, and hit the notification bell, as I definitely plan on continuing to make, you know, gaming videos here, hopefully on like a weekly basis. That's kind of what I'm trying to start to work towards. So, yeah, other than that, I have a second channel, of course, where I'm still doing reaction videos 5 days a week. Definitely you'll want to check that out too. And then for now, I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you back in the next video.